Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session. So thanks for attending. And just checking that you can see my slides here. All good?
All good. Thank you, Hannah.
All good. Thank you. All right. So thanks for joining today. My name is Ana Garcia-Melgar. I work at the School of Education at Trobe University. And in my role, I teach pre-service teachers, so mostly in the Bachelor of Teaching about inclusive education. So what I'm going to be talking about today is about how to model those universal design learning principles in pre-service teacher education, and really talking you through about how my thinking process and how I embedded those universal design for learning principles in initial teacher education. So before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands in which I'm connecting from today. That's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So I'm in the Bandura campus of La Trobe University and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and wherever you're connecting or from today. So there's a few things I'm going to be talking about in this session, and I promise I will stick to time. And I'll give you first an overview of my teaching context, because I think it helps to sort of situate how I apply universal design for learning in terms of challenges and opportunities, and then the thinking process in terms of how I embedded those universal design for learning principles in initial teacher education, and why this is important and how this supports teachers to become more inclusive in their future teaching practice. So in particular, I'll talk about multiple means of engagement. So how to build interest and self-regulation, how to provide or how to embed multiple means of representation to support accessibility, and those connections between new knowledge and previous knowledge in the subjects that I teach. And then finally, multiple means of action and expression. I'm going to be talking or focusing a bit more on different assessment formats that I have used and what the students said about that. So I'll finish with some key learnings and recommendations in terms of what I've learned from this process and what the students have said in their feedback, both formal and informal, and some recommendations for those of you who are in the initial or pre-service teacher space, or you just want to sort of think more about how to embed universal design for learning principles in your subject design and delivery, and how to make those principles more explicit when you're teaching. So a little bit of context, as I said, in my role, I teach in the Bachelor of Education. So I cover both the primary and secondary pathways. So that gives you a sense of how diverse my pre-service teachers are, and really coming from early childhood, primary, and secondary. So I'll talk a bit more about engagement in a second, but it was an important aspect of what I did was to really talk to or speak to their interests and make sure that I cover the different experiences that they would have in the classroom in their future teaching practice. So I teach the inclusive education specialization. So this is really about using universal design for learning, learning about inclusive practices, social model of disability, how to use trauma-informed practices, how to use neuroaffirming practices. So it's a really well-rounded specialization in terms of that we go through the basics and the principles and philosophies of inclusive education. And then we go into the more practical aspects of how do we create inclusive learning environments, how do we make space for personalized learning approaches. So it was a very a good context to actually model universal design for learning, and a very diverse student cohort. So not just in terms of where primary, secondary, early childhood, so what they were studying and then which type of schools they would teach in, but also in terms of the teaching experience. So people who were in the first year and other people who were coming, they would already have experience in the schools, and they would, as learning support people, for example, and now they're getting a formal teaching qualification. Some of them had variable knowledge of inclusive education, and some were completely new to inclusive education and what it means and how we can actually be inclusive educators. Whereas others, as I said, have been working in supporting roles in schools and were more familiar with inclusive education or working with the students with disability. And of course, in terms of demographics, so students with very different commitments, personal commitments, work commitments. And we get also lots of students who are on permission to teach, which means that they are already teaching in a school. So they have very busy schedules, and that's one of the reasons why the whole specialization, so all the subjects that I teach are taught online. So in terms of gaps in teacher education, and I think this won't come up as a surprise, we know that research shows significant gaps in preserving teachers' understanding and then ability to apply inclusive learning design principles to their teaching practice. So this is both in terms of their knowledge gap. So we know that teachers report feeling unprepared and they don't feel confident in how to support diverse learners effectively, but also in terms of skills gap. So traditional teacher education, although it is improving, it's still quite theoretical, I guess, in terms of inclusive education. And we do spend quite a lot of time talking about the philosophies and the frameworks, but then not enough time or opportunities for pre-service teachers to engage in practical application, for example, of universal design for learning principles. And also there is an experience gap in terms of how our pre-service teacher courses are designed, in terms of that we don't always model or explicitly embed those universal design for learning principles. So this means that for some pre-service teachers, they don't really get to experience what UDL is. And this makes it more difficult to actually see how it works and how they can implement that in their own teaching practice. So with online learning, we know it comes with its own challenges, but also opportunities. And this is where I thought more about the opportunities more than the challenges. So in terms of flexibility in engagement, so having different ways for students to interact and participate in synchronous and asynchronous activities. So things such as discussion forums or having polls or Mentimeters or, the different online tools that we can now use for students to interact with peers and also with the teaching staff during online sessions, but also in terms of embedding multiple representation modes in the learning management systems, so various media formats and content delivery, built-in accessibility features that come with the learning management system that can support inclusion and accessibility. And also, one of the things that I really focus on as an opportunity is how I would embed multiple ways for students to demonstrate learning and understanding. So based on that principle of having firm goals but flexible means to demonstrate what they had learned. So my rationale here, or the place I was coming from, is it is difficult for teachers to understand universal design for learning if they don't see it in practice. So again, coming back to that point about focus on theoretical approaches, it sounds good in theory, but then if I go to the classroom, then how do I actually embed it in my practice? So that was my rationale. They need to see it. They need to experience universal design for learning to be able to apply it to their teaching. And the way I worked through was really asking students, so getting feedback from students on what were the sort of pain points in how the subjects were structured and designed and delivered. What did they wanted to see more or what would increase their engagement? And then it was also based on my own observations of, for example, their assessment tasks. So I did notice that when I asked them to apply universal design for learning principles through case studies or to analyze lesson plans, for example, and see how they would make them more accessible and inclusive. They were really good at drawing on the theory, but then there was really very limited application to their teaching practice. And that's something that I took as a feedback that I needed to be more explicit on how to embed universal design for learning principles in my own teaching practice. So just as a quick way to be a bit more interactive and hear from you today as well, I would like to know what aspects of online learning you found challenging or unhelpful. And you could base these on your own experiences if you've been doing some online courses yourself or based on the experiences of your students. And you can just put a few statements and it will hopefully create a word cloud and just to get a sense of what are the pain points that you've experienced in online learning? And then I'll talk a bit more about what the students said in my courses and how I embedded universal design for learning. So I think the link should be on the chat. I can see sort of at the middle of the word cloud isolation. I'll just go and share my screen very quickly so you can see the results as well. Yeah, so isolation, lack of engagement. So yeah, not very, it's really, reflecting what I've seen in my own experience and also what my students say. And yeah, being passive, poor online design, limitations of technology, building relationships. So that goes hand in hand with engagement and limited ways to interact. So what this is telling me is that it's really there's clear issues with online or issues or things that we could do better, I should say, in terms of how we engage students in online learning. And it really reflects what I've seen in my students or what the students tell me in terms of how can we make the online environment more interactive, more engaging, and how we also embed different opportunities so they can contribute in ways that work for them as well. And I'll talk through now through a few of the things that I've done in my own teaching. But one of the things I started with that I think is really important is to have a consistent learning management. So whatever system you're using, we use Moodle here, but whether it's Canva or Blackboard, having a consistent layout with clear signposting and then including multiple means of representation, which could be, for example, short videos, guided readings, podcasts, so things that they can watch, things that they can listen to, and things that they can read on their own time. So I know my students, most of them do work through the learning management system, the content on the LMS, when they're on their phone, when they're on the train. So it's very important to have a very clean setup, and then that they have a very clear layout so they know each week what they need to do, and they have a clear expectation around how it's set up. So I usually start out with an introduction to the topic, how this relates to what they've been learning before, and then I usually have a video that introduces the topic as well with some reflective questions, some readings, or some resources to access, and then some interactions, which could be reflections or could be little polls that they do on the LMS or Padlets that I embed so they can see what other students are saying as well. So my focus here was really on both accessibility and reducing cognitive load. And this is again based on feedback from students that the way many subjects are designed online can be quite daunting in terms of it looks like a dump of content, and then it's really difficult to work through what are the priorities, what things should I be doing each week. So I did do a lot of work in terms of signposting, and then what I also do is I send them weekly announcements with a summary of this is what we're covering this week. And if you had, say, just 30 minutes to work this week on the subject and you don't want to fall behind, I would choose to do this reading and this reading. is a way to help them prioritize the content as well and reduce cognitive load. In terms of engagement and motivation, I also worked on embedding multiple and flexible opportunities for participation, both in synchronous and asynchronous activities. And I think one thing that I found in online subjects is that we tend to ask students to participate, say, unmute yourselves and talk or discuss this topic, or I will send you to breakout rooms and then you can discuss that. And that doesn't work for all the students for different reasons. And it could just be in terms of technology, or it could just be that they, as I said, they are on the train and they cannot really, unmute themselves or go to a breakout room. So I embedded different ways for them to participate. So whether it's a poll that they can do quickly on their phone, or whether it's a Padlet that then I could where they could see other students' contributions, and then I could take offline and upload to the LMS as well as a way to have a offline activity for them to reflect on as well. And also using very diverse case studies and examples from early childhood to secondary. And I'll talk a little bit more about assessment in a second, but also providing choices in assessment format and content. This is just an example of students contributing to, in terms of multiple means of representation. So during one session, I asked them to come up with what sources or what different means would they use to teach a unit on photosynthesis. And then they would go online and search for diagrams or for lesson plans or for videos that would contribute to that unit on photosynthesis. So it was sort of like a nice activity for them to reflect on multiple means of representation, but actually putting together those multiple means of representation for a teaching unit. Another key aspect of how I have embedded universal design for learning in my teaching are, as I said, those scaffolds or signposting, but also—
And I'm sorry, just 1 minute left.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of self-monitoring, so doing those weekly self-check activities and reflective questions, and also asking them to do this work on reflecting on takeaway messages by the end of the session. So I would like to finish with a bit on assessment design in terms of providing different choices. So I've allowed them to submit written essays or reports, but also record presentations or to use different modes to respond to the assessment task. So here, for example, what they could do is create a learning environment, taking pictures and then commenting or annotating on what they would improve, or making their own drawings, or using different technology to put together that learning environment. So giving them choices and also choices in how they interact during the activities. So starting with a mini lecture, for example, on a key topic, and then getting them to choose, do you want to work through a work example, or do you want to work more individually with your peers or with a tutor, and then having a final activity for everyone to do together. So something that worked really well during online sessions. So just to finish off, I would like to sort of reflect on my key learning. So it helped me also reflect on my principles and my practices as an educator, but also I saw an improvement on their ability to apply universal design for learning to their own teaching practices. They were more reflective of their own biases and assumptions. And I also learned as a teacher, as a lecturer, that there needs to be balance between choice and structure. So what I mean here is when I try, and this was by trial and error, I did try to provide too many choices sometimes in terms of how they would complete the assessments, or giving them the option to work on their own case studies and come up with their own case studies. And sometimes this actually created additional cognitive load for the students. So it's really finding that balance between choices, but within a specific structure. So then students know what they need to do to complete the assessment tasks, and those expectations are clear. And then, of course, that also helps with the marking process as well. Yeah, so that's all I had in terms of recommendations. Yeah, start small, focus on access, and gather feedback as you go and make adjustments. Some references that I will leave on the slide. And yeah, thank you so much for listening today.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. It's question time. So we've got 5 minutes for questions. So we do have one question already on the Slido, and we can put that up on the screen. Just a reminder, if you have a question, you can add it to the Slido. The details are there, and then just select Stream B, and we have a roving mic as well. So read, and there's also a QR code on your lanyard. Okay, let me read out the first question. So Anna, were there any sessions where you needed the students to engage live, regardless of whether they were on the train, or, for example, you had you talked about that a bit, and how were these sessions signposted?
Yeah, so we had sessions where I did give them a pre-warning that we will be doing things that would require their sort of, attention. So to give them that, pre-warning. And what I did is I give them like different options in terms of times to work from. So, and I'm quite flexible. Like I have, tutorial sessions, but then I let people jump from one to another. So I would say next week we're doing this. It's very important that you sort of, sit and do it. And you can choose from these different times that suit you. If those don't work, there's always the option to listen to the recorded session and then work through the activities yourself. And I do this when it gets closer to assessment time, and I really want them to start working on the assessments and being prepared for that. Yeah, so yeah, it's really about giving options if you can in terms of time, or if you can sort of prepare activities that they can do after they listen to the recorded session if they cannot attend the live session.
Perfect. We have time for one more question. Does anyone have a question from the room? Okay, hang on.
While you're moving a mic there, Joan, I might just quickly ask a question from online. It's Darren. Yeah, Anna, thank you for that. Probably a little bit more of an observation with it as well, but towards the end there, you're talking about it was really important for them to see UDL in practice, and putting that into an online space, where that's being delivered, and the challenges that come with that. You're mentioning the LMS. And I'm just wondering, from your point of view, how much has the technology helped, and how much has it added new barriers into that as well? It's give and take, isn't it?
Yes, good question. Yeah, so I think it helps with, you have embedded accessibility checks and those sort of things. But I think my main issue with our LMS, and it might not apply to other systems, is that we do have a template that we had to follow. And I don't find it very good in terms of laying out the content. So you had to work through different tiles to get to the content. And then there's no easy way to then get like an overview of, like the topics within each week, unless you go to a Word document, which is just downloading something else. So I know there's LMS systems are a bit better in terms that you can get that sort of table of contents, and then you can work through it, and then you can click and go straight away into that one. Ours is a bit restrictive, and I always struggle with those, pages within pages that you have to click through to get to it. And then students get a bit confused as to, I know I read something about this, or I know there was an activity on this, but now I cannot find it. So yeah, that's always my main issue with our system. Yeah.
We just have one question from the room just before we run out of time.
Thank you. You've spoken quite a lot about gathering student feedback throughout this development process, and even now that you've implemented it. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've gathered that feedback and when you've gathered that feedback from students?
Yeah, so again, I use different modes, and because I'm online, I cannot really go and ask them, like catch up with them face to face. So what I did is I asked them during the sessions and after the session. So if you want to stay, we can have like a bit of an informal chat. And that's one way I do it. But then what I also do is I embed polls in the LMS, just like vibe checks, where I get their feedback, and with very simple questions such as, would you like to see more of this or less of this? How is this working for you? And I do this in the early weeks and then like mid-semester, because that helps me see what I can adjust in the second half of the semester. And for example, I got a student saying, I don't think there are many or too many or enough examples on secondary students, and that I use that feedback to then embed more examples or to guide them through different readings that were more applicable to secondary students. And the other one I use is just sort of polls that I send to students via announcements. And I did that recently where I was putting together some sessions before assessment time. And I gave them different options in terms of when would you like the sessions to happen, so we know that they would suit their needs, but also what would you like to do in the sessions, such as would you like to work with your peers on assessments, or would you like me to go back through, this content, or, how do you want to engage? So what content do you want me to go through? How do you want to do it? And what would be—
Sorry, we're just about to run out of time, but thank you so much for that question and for your answer. And there are a couple of other questions on the slider that might get answered.